In 2 weeks from now, Tasmania will have a state election because their current government has fallen to a no confidence vote and no other government could replace it. Currently, there are two major polls that have discussed what seems to be likely government structures after this election. And so in this video, we'll place them on a YAPMS map and see more directly and have some more insight onto who will win what. So we'll start off with the YouGov poll, which was the first one to come out and is probably one of the one that I trust the most out of those, out of the two polls so far. Currently it has Labour slightly ahead at +3, but it's a bit more complicated coming into the seats. So I'll just kind of draw these off, draw the who gets what in quotas off of this, and then I'll discuss where preferences will go. Currently, this leaves 7 swing seats in these seats. These will likely be the final seats to be placed because they will rely on preferences from other parties. We'll start in Bass and Braddon, where which is of course Jeremy ROCKLIFF's home seat. He'll likely win from just primary vote, but it'll still be difficult to win a majority in these seats, considering the federal election and also considering the poll. Recently, the poll has given the Liberals a pretty decent favourite for a third seat. Of course, the threshold for a third seat is 37.5. And in Bass, Liberals are 1.5% behind, and then in Braddon they're 2.5% behind, and of course Labour is 3% behind. But in Braddon, the Greens are really heavily behind, and thus and the Independents don't really have enough to get that extra seat. So it is very possible, from what I'm seeing, that it's likely to be a Liberal and Labour competition victory in those, or that they will go to Nationals and Labour, which is something that I'll put in just for the fun of it. Usually I'll have these kinds of things because I know that there'll be this sort of markers that there'll be predictions. Actually, looking further into these polls, it seems that the kinds of low-hanging kind of seats that don't have enough to really get into those 25% or 12.5% thresholds are likely to sort of not preference each other. So and instead preference the major parties. Of course, the Greens generally would preference Labour, and Nationals will generally preference Liberals, and so they will probably end up with one independent for each of those seats, and so thus I put them at 3 and 3 and 1 on those. In Clark, it's looking like the Liberal Party will gain the extra seat. They are only behind it by 1 point in this one, and it's very unlikely that none of the 5% of independents or 2% of others that don't have their candidate picked will go for them. So it's very likely that they will end up ahead by this metric. And of course, with everyone else having won their sort of seats, it's very likely that Clark, even though it is the most third-party friendly, maintains from this poll is still a two-party majority in its electorate. Franklin, the polling has above the thresholds have currently looking like the Greens might get that extra seat, but it's kind of looking as well as that the Greens might not. And of course, that is Rosalie Woodruff's seat in Franklin. She might end up losing her own seat because the Liberals are likely to preference independents above Greens. From this, in this scenario, it'd be the independents winning that extra seat because Liberals don't have enough to get that. They have 31, they need 38, they need 37.5, which is a 6.5 difference. Independents need an extra 5% to get that extra seat. So it's very possible that either the independents is split so much that they end up preferencing Labour or the Liberals, and then they end up preferencing each other enough to for the Liberals to gain that extra seat, which is less likely. But the more likely thing is that the Liberals end up losing their last guy, and then moving those preferences to an independent above a Green, which is what from these kinds of preferences is looking like it's very possible. So yeah, we'll give an independent that extra seat. In Lyons, both parties are looking pretty even, but I'm pretty confident in that Labour will probably gain more independent votes from the kind of differences of these parties, and so they'll end up sort of getting that 37.5 first, enough to get that extra seat in Lyons. From these numbers, it's looking quite likely that Labour will get confidence and supply with 3 independents, enough to gain 4 of the 7 independents, enough to gain a majority, and so thus this would be. However, it would be quite turbulent, obviously, because these independents kind of have a lot of sway over the government there. And of course, that's kind of natural from a proportional system. And of course, and so thus, there's definitely a bit of a risk of them having another election from these numbers. But that's the same with the other poll that we're going to talk about, that the polling numbers just kind of look too small of a lead for either party for them to hold a consistent government unless they go for a grand coalition. Of course, there is another poll discussing the Tasmanian elections. This one has a larger sample size, but it also has a stronger Liberal vote, and so thus this is the one that I decided to put last, sort of on the sort of that one, mainly because it's sort of it's one that's exciting enough to see on the real map and see whether it's possible for another Liberal government to form, especially out of the sort of Nationals and Shooter, Farmer and Fisher sort of groupings. We'll go and start with the quota. From quotas, it seems that the Liberals are ahead in this poll. Of course, it seems from the popular vote that they are in this poll as well, with a very, very large margin, 34%. But it also seems that sort of translates to seats because it's proportionally representative, with the Liberals having a chance of getting a majority government. However, this is unlikely because in Bass there are 2 seats, swing seats, notably, and in Braddon too, but Bass specifically has Greens enough to preference Labour, but not enough for Labour to get over the line. But Labour has enough to preference independents over the line, and that is that's going to be like 2.5%. That's 1% under the position that they need, so it's very likely that the independents will end up winning a seat, and that the other seat will likely be won by the Nationals or the Liberals, because it seems that those 2 parties are... it's because this one has a very large rural party vote with 9.1%, and then those will likely get the remainder of the Liberal vote, because that 25%, that 33.5 is 4% short of of the 37.5 that they need, and 9% is only 3.5% from what they need. So it's very possible that the Liberals end up preferencing Nationals and specifically the Nationals from this position. In Braddon, it seems that the Liberal Party has a very commanding lead in Braddon, which was similar to what it was in last election, where they managed to win 45.6% of the vote. And in that one, they ended up winning a lot more seats, didn't they? They ended up winning 3 seats, but Jackie Lambie, which was kind of close to Liberals, ended up winning a seat. And, of course, they ended up giving the Liberals confidence and supply. I think something similar will happen from Braddon. They have a relatively low rural vote, with the Nationals coming last and the Shooters, Farmers, Fishers coming like a pretty close second to last. So it's very likely that those might actually end up preferencing Liberals, and Independents, and the rest of them don't really have enough to get an extra seat except for the Greens. So it's very likely that the Liberals and the Greens get the Liberals or the Greens get the last vote. And from seeing these kinds of the numbers, that the rest of the votes, Labour has 2 quotas. The Independents have 1 and like less than a quarter quotas. Then each of the Nationals and the SFF have a bit less as well. And so thus I'd probably end up giving the Liberals an extra seat from this poll. Remember that this poll, I actually don't believe in this poll, mainly because Demos AU polled horribly in the federal election, and I trusted the polls in the federal election, and I was disproven very heavily. So, but yeah, again, Braddon from this poll seems to be very confident about the Liberal Party. Clark's final seat seems to be between Labour and the Greens. Of course, none of them reached the quota for the final seat, but it looks like it's very much a burden of the Independents to choose which party takes that final seat. Realistically, looking at the numbers, it looks like enough of them will back Labour, enough for them to get the seat. And of course, the Liberals have a little bit of a say in this too. And the Liberals obviously preference Labour over the Greens. And so it's very possible that Labour wins. But for the sake of this video, and for the sake of like very much questionability in these kinds of like Clark area, the sort of urban oppositionary sort of nature of cities in general seems to be very friendly to Greens, but especially like Independents that have preferences to Greens can do quite well in urban areas. And so I would actually say that it's probably a bit more, it's actually very possible that the Greens end up winning in the seat of Clark. And I'll put it like that mainly because it's sort of, well, no, I haven't given Labour a single seat at all, so I'll do that. You know, I'll be a little, I'll give them a little seat. I'd probably give them more in Franklin too, because I'm pretty sure they're close to getting that majority in Franklin and Lyons. Franklin looks pretty much of a competition between the Independents and Labour, with the Independents vying for a 4th seat and Labour looking for a 2nd seat. Labour is 2.5 points below that margin, and the independents are similarly 2 points behind that margin. But you can see Labour usually relies on preferences from the Greens, but the Greens just hit 1 and they're only 4% above 1. So it's likely that Liberal preferences will decide whether Labour or the Independent gets to win in Franklin. So from looking at this margin, it's very possible that the Liberals will give those preferences to the Independent. My guess is out of this situation. It's very possible. Like if you're a Tasmanian, you can talk to me in the comments. But from this poll, it looks very possible that the Independents end up with a third seat in Lyons, and that sort of definitely gives a very strong independent push in that region. And they have the plurality of seats in Franklin in this situation, which would probably be pretty decent to them. And third parties would have a majority of seats, where the two majors would only have 3 seats between them, which is similar to the polls. Liberals and Labour have less than half of the votes in this one, I'm pretty sure. Yes. Oh no, they would have 51%. But the idea is that Liberal preferences would go to the Independents. That's why they wouldn't have a majority. But they do, in theory, have a very slim majority of the electorate. Currently, Lyons, which is Andrew Jenner's home seat, Andrew Jenner's Nationals are coming last in this poll in Lyons, and it's likely that they'll end up preferencing either the Liberals, which have enough, which if they got those national preferences would be enough for a third seat, which I'll place them in that third seat. I'll place them there with the third seat. And it's very possible that there isn't really much. It's mainly like a competition between Labour, the Independents, and the Shooters, Farmers, Fishers for preferences from... no, it's competition in between themselves. So 25, 7.9, 6.9. Okay, so it's likely that Labour gets eliminated first. They end up moving their preferences to the Independent, which wins the last seat. From these numbers, it looks very possible for a Liberal government with the Nationals and a few independents, with 4 independents, 4 out of 8, which would still be quite volatile, of course, with the Nationals and those 8 independents, sort of with the ability to form another no confidence vote and bring Tasmanians into another election. If this happens, if it happens like in 2026, I'd be pretty confident in like a Labour victory from then. Like that, it's very unlikely that sort of if that happens, then. But yeah, realistically, I mean, Labour could, in theory, form a government if they worked with independents at 8. That brings them up to 17, and they have to get 1 Green, or they have to go with the Greens and then take 1 independent. But it is usually the onus of the largest party to form government, in which the Liberals have the largest party in this situation, and they would form government. So yeah, this sort of wraps up the video. With this poll, I actually don't really believe that, of course, we all know what Demos said about Tasmania's sort of swing seats in the federal election, and that ended up being disastrously wrong. One of the MRPs, the latest MRP before the election, had Labour winning a few seats it turns out that Labour ended up winning all of the seats in Tasmania except for Clark, which has a popular independent. So, again, I wouldn't put too much... I'd treat these with a pinch of salt, especially this one. Demos seems to be a bit of like a Liberal internal. But, and of course, like there's a few like commenters on one of... on the Poll Bludger, I believe, that have sort of Liberal internal characters basically on there, which I'll talk about next time, or I'll sort of look through... I'll do a lot on my channel considering elections, and then I'll probably do a bit of gaming on my channel as well. Thank you, see you later.